make our world so vibrant. Whether you're lighting the menorah, decorating the Christmas tree, celebrating Kwanzaa, or other important holidays of the season, I wish you an abundance of joy and peace.
This is Rogers TV. This program is brought to you by Rogers Xfinity, connecting you to more of what you love. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Hi again, everybody, and welcome to Living Well, Giving Well on Rogers Television, Grey County. I'm Fred Wallace, along with Denise Reid. Coming up today, we'll have a video featuring the Saugeen Memorial Hospital Foundation. And for those of you that are served by Saugeen Memorial, we hope that you will continue to support them in many ways, shape, or form, and also leave a gift in your will for Saugeen Memorial Hospital Foundation. And we'll talk about that as we go along today. Our sponsor today is the YMCA of Owen Sound Grey Bruce. They've got many, many great services. And again, we thank you in advance for your support of the YMCA in Owen Sound and Grey Bruce. Our guest today is Troy Dore from Donnelly Murphy Lawyers in Port Elgin. Port Elgin and elsewhere, I take it, Troy?
Yeah, just a few other places. Yes, so actually we have 4 offices and 1 satellite office. So I'm primarily based out of the Port Elgin office, but we also have Goderich, Grand Bend, Kincardine, and we have a satellite office in Hanover.
So give us a little background on yourself personally. Where were you born in this area?
It's a very personal question.
Okay, well,
that's what this show is all about.
I didn't expect the hard-hitting questions. So my background, so I grew up on a farm outside the metropolis of Teeswater, if you know where that is.
Oh, for sure.
Grew up there and then went to undergrad at Laurier in Waterloo, and then I went to law school of U of T. So like most people from the area, the plan really wasn't always to come back, but then you find your way back and then you settle and you realize, yeah, this is the right call. So I came back in 2010-ish and then was called to the bar in 2012.
2012. So yeah, a little difference in when you're talking Kitchener-Waterloo and then you're talking U of T, which is right downtown Toronto.
Correct.
So then moving to Port Elgin, is different.
Sure.
And did you, when you came out of law school, we've talked in other episodes too that in a smaller region, you can't maybe just specialize in one of the fields, whether it be family law. So do you find that your practice incorporates a lot of the different areas?
Good question. So I find that the practice in the smaller communities are going that way. Just the nature of law is becoming much more complicated, much more specialized, that it's a lot more difficult to be kind of the jack of all trades. Now, with that said, I try to specialize in specific areas, but my general practice is solicitor based, so wills, estates, real estate, corporate, with the hope of maybe specializing down the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Alex Wade last week was telling us that he likes, even though his dad was in a single person practice, he does like being in an office where there's lawyers where you can bounce things off of. And I guess probably with you guys with having four different, did I count right? 4?
And a satellite.
And a satellite,
yes,
sorry.
yes.
That is helpful for your practice and also for your clients.
Yeah, so it's actually really helpful for me because there's 10 lawyers in our firm, and then so bouncing off ideas absolutely is very key, but also I'm kind of the more solicitor based. More of the other lawyers are more litigation based, either personal injury, family law, litigation general. So to have access to those types of expertise, particularly, the run of a course, will or real estate transaction doesn't really involve it, but there's certain things when things kind of go sideways that it's very good to be able to pick up the phone.
Troy Dore is our guest today on Living Well, Giving Well. Our concept is asking people to think about long range with your will, leaving a charitable gift, be it to the Saugeen Memorial Hospital Foundation, be it to the YMCA of Grey Bruce Owen Sound, or any of the other charities associated with us. We want to start, Troy, before we get into personal effects and that sort of thing, the value and significance and importance of everybody having a will.
Very good question and very important. it's such a challenge when clients ask me, well, is the will that you print off offline, the will kits, all that other stuff, is those fair? And I say, in a basic sense, it's better to have one versus not. Where I see the value with respect to a lawyer going through it with you is the actual conversation, the actual going through your assets, determining what your estate planning goals are, and kind of assisting and being comfortable picking up if it's an accountant that you need to talk to, if it's a financial advisor. That's where the real value added, I find, comes from. But in a basic sense, absolutely, it makes it much more, it's going to be a challenging time anyways when somebody passes away, but just to add the fact of not having a will, not knowing who to speak to, where to go with respect to assets, all of that process is very important.
And I think it's, better for your family that they don't have to deal with that kind of, they're already grieving.
Yes.
Whoever it may have passed. They don't need to have to be grieving, trying to figure out, well, where would I'll give an example, my mom or dad want us to give or not. So you're really doing your family a favor.
Well, and it just absolutely, it's in addition to the emotional aspects of somebody passing away, of having a guideline, a guidepost, as to where things are supposed to go. And also in general, if you pass away without a will, a lot of people say the government will take your money. They won't take your money, but they get to just say how it's distributed, meaning the shares of your respective estate, where it goes as to your family members. So if you want to be able to say that versus the government of Ontario, then that's why it's important to have a will.
Will the government get it right?
Well, I always, in my client meetings, I always stay the heck away from politics.
Okay, all right. With the will, and Living Well, Giving Well is about charitable giving in the will. Can you define the benefits that Denise would have, or I would have, if Denise left to a skating club, or if I decided to leave to a local school band, that sort of thing? Tell us about the benefits of having those provisions in the will.
Sure. So, it's funny that we're talking about politics, because beyond the actual being able to give back to the community, that's obviously the most important part of, ensuring that causes that you feel, strongly about are supported, and ensuring that those services will be proceeding and going forward for other people to take advantage of. That's the ultimate point. Now, like everything, though, there's always like a tax element and planning parts of it, and there's generally some benefits for charitable giving as part of the tax hit that you will receive when you pass away. And then there's other, this is beyond our topic, but there's ways to structure the giving so that it's the most tax efficient for your estate.
Well, and I think that that's great. And I think that is something that you, as the person getting your will done, whether it's not just your lawyer, but also your financial planner, also maybe your family too. We can talk about communicating to each other as to what we want, what we need, and it may take a team just to do that,
Well, and again, goes to the point of everything's becoming much more complicated and specialized and complex. I mentioned tax, but I also say in my client meetings, you should never want to get tax advice from a lawyer, because generally lawyers don't really know what for purposes of numbers and such like that. But in a basic sense, my process at least is wanting to have the full picture. So it's not going to work with just a will. It has to involve what your assets are, your investments, your tax planning. All of that has to be part of it if you want to achieve what you want to go or what you want to do.
Troy, with wills, obviously priority one is to have one, but what do you see as the do's of setting up a will, and are there any don'ts as part of the will making process?
Good question. So what I find to be important is the process. So in a basic sense, the do's are to take the time. Now, I'll give you an example. Most lawyers will ask you for asset disclosure, checklists, get a better understanding of what your goals are. It's not an easy process. It's not fun. It's work, but it's an important side. So even when we've given it and a client comes in with only a partially filled out, I go through that process to make sure I have a full understanding. So beyond the do's and don'ts with respect to You know, if it's your personal effects, leaving it to the discretion of your estate trustee as to how they divide, which is an option. You can put that in your will, or including specific assets to go to specific people. Beyond that, it's more of the conversation and the process.
I would think, and this is coming from a little bit of background. I used to work at a bank many years ago, had an estates department, okay? And boy, some of the stories that would come out of that, sad stories, because people, sometimes when it comes to money or whatever, or personal effects, they go a little crazy and don't really, just don't stay common sense. And that's where I say, like, the personal effects, sure, I don't know whether I'd want to leave it to my trustee to decide that my mother's wedding ring is going to go to whomever. So is it better to establish in the will what you do, who you exactly want to go to, or is it better to give your, I want my daughter to have my ring and I'm going to give it to her now?
Right. So some really good points in there. So first off, I always tell my clients that if you want to give something to somebody and you're not using it, give it to them now. There's no point of leaving it in a will. Why not enjoy giving them that item? So that's the first part, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Second part is and I understand why clients want to do it, they want to have it both ways. They want to ensure that, you know, valuable items or items of sentimental nature go to specific people, but they don't want to put it in the will because they don't want to have to go through the hassle and the cost of updating it if something changes. Right. So what most clients will ask me is say, well, okay, is it okay if I just have a list somewhere saying where everything goes? And I have to explain to them that basically, if you don't deal with it specifically in the will, then you are basically expecting your beneficiaries to honor your wishes, which in the majority, sure, that's fine. But the problem with being a lawyer is that all you do is worry about the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario is that there's not an understanding. And what actually happens is anything of value is sold, and the value of that is distributed through the residue of the estate. So if you want those items to go to those specific people, you have to put it in the will.
Okay. Troy Dore is our guest. Troy is a lawyer with Donnelly Murphy out of Port Elgin, with offices here, there, and everywhere, right? We'll be back. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about personal effects and the value and the ways to proceed in that. We're going to take a quick break and get a nice video from one of our sponsoring partners and host charities. That's Saugeen Memorial Hospital Foundation. So please stay with us. We'll be back with more Living Well, Giving Well on Rogers Television, Grey County.
Hello, I'm Martha Bennett, and I am board chair of the Saugeen Memorial Hospital Foundation. Our mission at Saugeen Memorial Hospital Foundation is to manage and raise funds for equipment, the facility, and staff support to ensure our community and visitors have access to the best hospital care. In order to achieve that, we really strive to come up with inspiring ways to engage our community to raise funds each year. I'm inviting everyone to join us in August for our Grand Fondo Lake Huron cycle event, and we have participants from the ages of 2 to 84. In a few short years, participants and sponsors have raised over $1.6 million. You don't have to cycle but there's other ways you can help support the foundation. It's not about giving money, sometimes it's about giving your time, and you can take part in foundation fundraiser events. You can volunteer your time with the foundation. You can share foundation information on your social media page with friends and family. With over 1,700 ER visits, 3,500 x-rays and ultrasounds, and over 500,000 lab tests annually, with your aid, we can ensure the best quality care close to home. Join us this summer to come out and cycle, or this December for our annual Light the Way Radiothon. Remember, giving is not just about making a donation, it's about making a difference. Your support does just that.
Hi everybody. Welcome back to Living Well, Giving Well on Rogers Television, Grey County. I'm Fred Wallace along with Denise Reid, and our guest is Troy Dore from Donnelly Murphy Lawyers. You just saw a video from Saugeen Memorial Hospital Foundation. Recently, back in November, they were recipients of the Smile Cookies. So thanks to everybody that bought Smile Cookies in Saugeen Shores and supported Saugeen Memorial Hospital Foundation. And coming up, they have their annual Radiothon, which raises a huge amount of money on 97.9, what's now known as the Bruce radio station. So again, we thank you for your support of Saugeen Memorial Hospital Foundation and all of the charities that are connected to Living Well, Giving Well. As mentioned, our guest is Troy Dore from Donnelly Murphy, and Denise wants to ask about personal effects as we move along.
Yes, well, I mean, that's, I mean, there are certain things that you want to, I know, as I sit here looking at my rings, my wedding ring and that I have a son and a daughter. I want that to go to my daughter, and so those are specific things that we've, put in our will. And I think that that's, what you said could be possibly a good idea instead of leaving trustee. What I was kind of curious when I read the notes is weapons and ammunition. Right. I mean, I don't own a gun. I'm not a hunter or whatever. But what do people put that in their will?
Yes, they do. I can tell you that.
It's sad, yeah.
Yeah, so absolutely, depending on the client, they want to ensure that maybe they have a collection, maybe they have a few gun items that they specifically want to go to specific people. It presents a challenge, obviously just the nature of them. So I'll split it between restricted firearms and then firearms that aren't restricted. So in a basic sense, somebody passes away with non-restricted firearms, the estate trustee doesn't have to be licensed. They have to give notice to the RCMP, and then within a reasonable period of time, they have to distribute that to the beneficiary. Now, the challenge, though, is the beneficiary has to be registered to be able to receive it. So good drafting for a will gives the discretion to the estate trustee that if, for some reason, the beneficiary can't receive it, maybe they have a checkered past that they're not allowed to become licensed, something like that, then usually you ensure that the estate trustee is not locked. They can sell the item and then give the proceeds of that to the specific individual. Now, with respect to restricted firearms, unfortunately, the grandfathering provisions that used to be applicable are no longer. And in a basic sense, if you can't give that to or sell it to an exempt person, which is a very limited number of individuals or organizations, then you are basically surrendering it to local enforcement. So if you have those type of items, and I can appreciate they've been in the family possibly for a very long time, you are creating definitely a problem that has to be dealt with by your estate trustee. So it's always better to be proactive than reactive.
Well, and that, I mean, okay, that just gives a good example why you need to go to a lawyer to get this. I mean, I don't think their online thing is showing about the guns, or, I mean, maybe people, I'm sure people just pass them over or whatever, being official or whatever. But yeah, I guess I was just thinking personal effects. In all honesty, maybe it's a woman thing, I don't know. Jewelry. But there's all kinds.
It's a good point, because and then the challenging with the drafting of wills is what is personal effects, because that can mean two different things to two different people, and it can be as broadly defined as you want, basically everything except for real property, meaning a house or land, or it can be specifically to specific items. And I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but there can be really problems with how you draft a will, ensuring where those items go based on the definition. Particularly, and again, I don't want to go too far in the weeds, there's what's called dual wills, and that's a very important part that you have to ensure that the definition is correct to make sure that those items go to the people that you're trying to get them to.
In your experience, you've used the word challenge many times. What's the greater challenge, a financial asset for a family that they're leaving, or these personal effects?
Good question. From a purely dealing with them aspect, there's the control aspect of personal items that you can easily get control. So you don't have to go to a bank and, again, outside of this conversation, deal with probate, all this other stuff to get access. So in a basic sense, control is easier. The problem, though, is dealing with the obligation. So an estate trustee has an obligation to the beneficiary to get care and control of those assets, and if they aren't specifically to specific people, then you have to get as much money as possible for those beneficiaries. So that can include making sure that you take it to an auction house, have an estate sale, deal with the non-valuable items via donation, all that kind of stuff. So there, in a basic sense, at the start, there isn't a greater responsibility, but after a period of time, if you have a decent amount of value in those items, they can be more difficult to deal with than a financial asset. Financial asset, you get control, you get probate, you liquidate, you put it into the estate account. That's dealing with a bank,
Kind of cut and dried.
which is not as fun as it could be sometimes, but it's at least a straightforward process.
Well, we've talked before too about being a trustee. I mean, is an honor. I mean, the person who's passed away trusts you as a trustee, and that. But there's a lot of work there.
Oh, that's an incredible amount of work. And I always talk to my clients about make sure you talk to the estate trustee to ensure that they want to take it on, because they don't have to. They can say, nope, I'm not touching this. They renounce, and then it falls to the next person if that person's listed in the will. So it's very important to ensure that they are prepared to take that on. And also, you have to appreciate that they have an obligation to the beneficiaries, which could lead, in the worst case scenario, to potential claims against them for not properly administering the estate.
Troy Dore is our guest from Donnelly Murphy in Port Elgin. We're talking about personal effects and the value of the will. What about putting names on things or labeling? You know, we've got a nice print or a painting, whatever the case happens to be.
Yeah, so very good question, and one that I typically avoid answering when I'm talking to a client because it all depends on the circumstances. In a basic sense, and again, you know, there's truth in you know, those terms of phrases you hear. You know, possession's 9/10 of the law, in the sense of, you know, if it's in the home, and while it might be indicated, it's not clear cut as to whether that person has a legal right to it. If it's something of value, that could lead to conflict between the beneficiaries, and all of a sudden you're paying lawyers instead of dealing with the asset. So in a basic sense, I leave it up to the client. I never exactly tell them not to do something, but I ensure they understand that they're creating a significant risk by not properly dealing with it.
And I think we've talked about that, if, you know, specific communication. I mean, I think that's always lacking. I don't care where, you know, whether you're at work or, you know, with my husband or, you know, whatever. Communication is extremely important, whether that's through your financial planner that takes that information to your lawyer and to the trustee. So without that, and talking to your family, it's a hard topic, right?
Well, and yes, lots of people don't want to deal with it, understandably. They don't want to go through the process of a will. They think it's a challenging, understandable subject matter. They don't want to even think about it. But yes, it's important. Now, the family is a really good point in the sense of what I always recommend to my clients is, you know, families are challenging. There might be different ideas as to what's fair under a will. And unless you're under a court order, fair basically comes down to what the person, the client, thinks is fair. But what you don't want to do is create a circumstance where it's the estate trustee explaining this to your beneficiaries as to what you thought was fair. That's not a fair position to put your estate trustee into. So while it's a tough conversation to have, it's better for you to have that conversation than your estate trustee walking into something.
Why is that conversation so tough?
Man, well,
or do you have an answer for that?
well, I have lots of thoughts. I don't know if it's a correct answer. In a basic sense, families are challenging, right? Everyone has challenging. That doesn't mean that you don't have that family unit, you don't have that love and support. But Tolstoy, every family is unhappy in its own way. So that's where the first part of it is that, you know, if it's dealing with a home that you want to go to a specific child or something like that, very difficult. Also, the other side of that is a lot of children, even adult children, don't want to talk about it either. No. They don't want to think about it. So it's a difficult conversation on all sides.
Yeah, because we don't want to face the fact that, you know, our parents aren't going to be here, or if something, you know, happens or whatever. But boy, I hope, you know, when you're making a will, like that the person making it, I'm about myself, I'm not going to make a will that's going to make my children you know, fight over. Yeah, you hope that you make it, in my mind, as fair as possible, that it could be set out and that everybody's talking afterwards, I guess, if you want to go that, because that's very unfair. of the person.
The estate trustee's role is very difficult.
Oh, I can't even
They're already
imagine.
taking on that responsibility, and depending or not whether you're allowing them compensation for that, they might be just doing it out of respect for you. So yes, that's where it's important to have those conversations up front. In a basic sense too, going back to personal effects, some people are worried, well, if I put it in the will, what happens if I sell it or I transfer it? And that's where I have to explain to clients, that's okay. Unless it's specific in the will, if that item doesn't exist when you pass away, it just goes away. There's one specific example though that I just like to flag for the people at home, is that if you're operating under what's people call power of attorney, but if you're operating as an attorney for property and there's a specific item in a will, if you sell that item, the value of that item comes out of the estate proceeds for that specific individual.
Okay.
So that's the one example where if that person has sold it on behalf of another person, then it can be
And that makes sense, right?
Well,
Like,
it's
it
the
makes
balancing.
sense.
It's legislation. It's just kind of how it is. But that's where it's important for a power of attorney to understand what's in a person's will too, if they're acting for them.
Is there a job description for a power of attorney? Or not a power of attorney for the trustee. Like, can you imagine? Like, it's an honor, but boy,
No.
I don't know.
Somebody once said that was in a room and said, has anybody been an executor or trustee? And hands went up, and then he said, how many of you would do it again? So why is it difficult?
Well, so the challenge too is what part of the life cycle you're dealing with for a person. I guess that was kind of cold, but in a basic sense, if you're dealing with, say, for spouses, you deal with it on behalf of your spouse. You structure your assets so the vast majority flows by right of survivor. Then you already know your creditors, you know where your assets are, you deal with the taxes. So that is a streamlined example of acting as an estate trustee. If you're acting for a deceased parent or say a friend, it's a whole completely different ball of wax. And that's where people kind of get their eyes opened as to how much responsibility, how much work it is, and how long it can go on, particularly if probate's required. Not uncommon for 2 years for this process to take until you're finally done.
Drag on. Troy, when people want to talk to you and contact you about wills or all of the procedures that you're involved in, how do they do that?
Probably the easiest way is just go to our website, www.dmlaw.ca. You can get our contact information. You can find our email addresses all on there. It's probably the most simplest way versus, well, I could give us the 800 number, but in a basic sense, that's usually where people find us.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Troy Dore was our guest today, and Troy is with Donnelly Murphy Lawyers. He's based out of Port Elgin. They have 4 offices and a satellite office. When we come back on our next edition of Living Well, Giving Well, our guest will be Joanne Horton. Once again, Denise and I would like to encourage you to leave a charitable gift in your will, and if you need more information about that, always contact willpower.ca. Thanks again for joining us today on this edition of Living Well, Giving Well on Rogers, Grey County.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
With Rogers TV, you can cheer on the home team from the comfort of your living room. We'll head to the rink, the field, the court, or the pitch, so you don't have to. Tune in and cheer on your local amateur athletes on Rogers TV.
This is a perfectly healthy child. What's unhealthy are birth alerts, a racist practice that may stop this Indigenous mother from going home with her newborn. Become an ally. Rise above racism in healthcare.
You're watching